Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings. Now, I pray that these books that we're reading are intellectually stimulating and working in some direction in your lives to the transformative power of Torah. I hope to keep going with these, and it's a joy to be able to read such profound works. And last week we finished off the book The Soul by Rabbi Aiden Steinsaltz, a modern-day Torah scholar, and I enjoyed the way he eloquated his message, and I've been reading a lot of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov's material lately, and in my search for something new, I found that Rabbi Steinsaltz had written a book called The Tales of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Formerly it was called Breslov, but it's the same rabbi, the famous Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. So, I thought, okay, it'd be a great continuation. Not really a deviation from the past. We're getting a blend of some traditional Jewish scholarship with some modern Jewish scholarship. So I thought, okay, this sounds like a great book, and so let's just jump right into it. Okay, we're going to start with the introduction. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov only lived a short life from 1772 to 1810. So do the math. That's only 38 years, his life. He is one of the most original and outstanding thinkers to have emerged from the Hasidic world, a world that in its day was the source of a profound spiritual renaissance within Judaism, and that certainly did not lack for great men. Yet few of these actually attained the spiritual stature or the intellectual power of Rabbi Nachman. Now, he was the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, if you are not familiar, keeper of the good name. I mean, so he had a profound scholarship in his family lineage, for sure. In his short life, marked by physical and mental suffering, he not only produced several masterpieces of religious writing, but also established a movement that remains faithful to his teachings and personal leadership, both in his lifetime and after his death, and, in fact, down to this very day. Despite the passage of time and the changes in literary taste, his spiritual legacy has remained of fundamental significance to all who study the Hasidic way. Rabbi Nachman's Hasidism did their uttermost to preserve his teachings, his talks, and his way of life. Very profound writing. I'm reading a lot of Rabbi Nachman's material, and it's just, boom, mind-blowing. Both through his writings and through the tradition of his followers, there has come down to us a portrait of a truly remarkable man. Of all Rabbi Nachman's works, the tales, some of which appear in this volume, may be considered the peak of his creative life, both for the originality of their form and content and for the profundity of their underlying ideas. These stories, which are essentially fairy tales dating from Nachman's last years, are a mixture of intellectual and poetic imagination, simplicity of form, and complexity of content. On the one hand, any child can read them as one would a tale of ancient days, as the author himself put it, and on the other hand, one can, as an adult, read them again and again, analyze and study them. And I find this is one of the best ways of preservation of oral tradition is understanding the basic storyline and constantly discover them in layer upon layer of hitherto unrevealed symbol and meaning. Okay, the life of Rabbi Nachman was born in April of 1772 in the town of Medzibowo in Ukraine to a distinguished Hasidic family. On his mother's side, he was the great-grandson of Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. Rabbi Nachman's outstanding qualities were already apparent from his earliest years, and although he was rather lively and something of a scamp, he seems to have possessed dazzling spiritual powers, incisive intelligence, and a genuine piety, kind of a unique soul, as we read in the book of the last week on the soul. He had a high soul for sure. It is said that his own childish sins would literally cause him to blush in shame before the Almighty. In accordance with the customs of the times, he was married off at the age of 14 and went to live at the house of his father-in-law in a village near the town of Medvedevka. There he remained for 5 years, immersed in study and prayer. Despite his youth, people of all kinds gathered around him and chose him as their spiritual guide and teacher. Sometime before his 20th birthday, he moved to town and was there acclaimed as a Hasidic Rebbe with a substantial group of followers at a young age. Shalom, Ashley G. and Sheila. It's so good to have you again. He thus emerged as the propounder of an original doctrine all his own that did not at all coincide with the teachings of many of the great Hasidic leaders of the day. This independence, combined with his youth and tendency to be outspoken in his criticism of important individuals, caused a growing disagreement that later resulted in Rabbi Nachman and his followers becoming isolated from other Hasidic groups. In 1798, Nachman decided quite suddenly to travel to the land of Israel, which throughout his life was for him a focal point of intellectual and deep emotional attraction. He felt, too, that by actually living in the land, he would accomplish what his great-grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, had failed to do. He therefore left his family and, accompanied only by his first pupil, who remained his faithful servant throughout his life, traveled via Odessa and Constantinople to the Holy Land. The journey was beset by hardship, mishaps, and strange incidents, all recorded by his companion. Rabbi Nachman decided to travel incognito and thus became the object of much hostility and suspicion along the way. His spiritual doubts and struggles, the odd way in which these manifested themselves, and the real hardships of the voyage, not the least of which was the fact that it took place at the time of Napoleon's march on the Holy Land, all added to the strange and mysterious quality of the journey. Notwithstanding, Rabbi Nachman managed to reach the land of Israel and even to remain there for a few months, mainly at Tiberias and Sfat. After several strange adventures, including his capture by the Turks and ransom by the Jewish community of Rhodes, he returned home. Rabbi Nachman next settled in the town of Zlatopol, where, for reasons that are still not clear, he aroused the enmity of the charismatic Rabbi Leib, the Shopler Zid. This quarrel and others like it beset him throughout his life and caused him much grief wherever he went. He and his Hasidim and their followers after them were hounded by many leading rabbis of the day and in some places were actually persecuted. Rabbi Nachman was accused of arrogance, of messianic pretensions, and of propagating semi-heretical doctrines akin to Sabbateanism and Frankism, although he himself tried to steer clear of taking an active part in these controversies. And although he had the support of such leaders as his powerful uncle Baruch of Medzeboz, the seer of Lublin, and Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liaudi, the opposition to his teachings continued. His supporters were far away and anyway too preoccupied with their own struggles with the opponents of Hasidism to give him any real support. Rabbi Nachman moved to the city of Breslov in 1802 and lived there for several years. It was here that he produced the major part of his work. In Breslov, he suffered several severe personal catastrophes. He was widowed. Several of his children died, including his only son, in whom he had invested his spiritual and dynastic hopes, and he himself was found to be suffering from tuberculosis. In 1810, he moved to Uman, knowing that his death was imminent, and he breathed his last there in October of that year. He died before he was 40 years old. Short life, but as we'll see, very profound thinker for sure. Stories and students. Rabbi Nachman was a prolific writer and from his youth would write copious notes to himself, although he burnt almost as many as he wrote. Most of his manuscripts were destroyed in the same way. Of the books he wrote himself, only one small volume remains, Sefer Hamidot. Beautiful book. I've read. I thought about reading it online here, but I found it to be long, so I thought, a collection of short proverbs or sayings arranged by subject, prayer, love, truth, and so on. Most of these proverbs are taken from ancient Jewish sources, ranging from the Bible itself, to the later commentators. Rabbi Nachman did not just repeat these sayings, but refashioned, simplified, and expanded them. Sefer Hamidot has appeared in many editions, and some scholars, such as Rabbi Zadok HaKohen of Lublin and several of the Breslov Hasidim, added comments to them. Yeah, lots of commentary on them. They're just profound, deep thinking. Rabbi Nachman's major work is Likutei Moharan. This is what I'm reading now, published in 1808 and consisting of his teachings, both public and individual, over several years. The collection of sermons or talks is original and varied in both forms and content, touching on almost every subject related to Judaism and Jewish thinking. Yeah, it's 11 volumes or so, 22 volumes I hear, but I'm still in the first volume. Been at it for a couple of weeks, and just profound. Yeah. Ways of worshiping God, relations between man and his fellows, the Jews and other nations of the world, belief and doubt, and many more. The talks are based on texts drawn from the Bible, the Talmud, and the Zohar, and Rabbi Nachman builds a whole repertoire of new meanings into each and every word. A multi-dimensional series of mystic implications and exegesis. The book, which found warm support among the religious leaders of the day, is an outstanding demonstration of Rabbi Nachman's mastery of the sources and his effortless linking of subjects from many areas. Likutei Moharan is the source text of the Breslov Hasidim, and they, their descendants, and many others have found in it, each in his own way, Torah, wisdom, and guidance. The tales, like the second part of Likutei Moharan, were published posthumously, and most of them, especially the longer stories, were recounted to his Hasidim in the last years of Nachman's life. They are told in the language of the people, in Yiddish, and were recorded by his outstanding pupil, Rabbi Nathan, who added to them from memory or from his own notes. And, he cites in there often where he had lost his notes, but where he had regained knowledge of the story from, and he's very thorough, his student was, for sure. Where necessary, and translated and published them, initially in Hebrew. Subsequent editions were published in accordance with Rabbi Nachman's wishes in a bilingual Hebrew-Yiddish translation, as well as the major books, 3 volumes relating to Rabbi Nachman were published. Conversations of Rabbi Nachman, in praise of Rabbi Nachman and the life of Rabbi Nachman. These are not merely biographies, but recount his teachings as they were delivered orally on various occasions, and they are crucial to an understanding of his work. Over the years, some dozens of volumes have appeared on Rabbi Nachman, most of them new versions or anthologies of earlier works, although some do contain new material attributed to Nachman himself. Rabbi Nachman's pupils and followers are worthy of a chapter to themselves. As we have seen, he was blessed from his earliest years with a gift for attracting people who not only learned Torah and good deeds with him, but were bound to him by deep ties that could not be broken even by isolation and persecution. The Breslovers were a heterogeneous community, including learned rabbis, and this is where we find today most of Chabad are all Breslovers, teachers and scholars, as well as simple folk. Some from the lowest strata of society, and Rabbi Nachman was noted for his ability to find common language with each and every one. At the same time, his personal preference was for superior people whom he felt were more likely to understand the depth and scope of his ideas, and, what is more, to disseminate them further. The outstanding personality in this category is his closest pupil and follower, Rabbi Nathan Steinsaltz. Rabbi Nathan came from a wealthy and respected family, and, like Nachman, was from his youth recognized as a prodigious talent. He came to Rabbi Nachman in 1802, and from the very first moment of their meeting, the two found a deep bond of communication and understanding. As Rabbi Nachman said at the time, "We have already known each other but had simply separated for a time. It was Rabbi Nathan who collected, anthologized, and published Nachman's work. And were it not for his devoted labors, it is doubtful whether Nachman's literary work would have survived to the extent that it has. All Rabbi Nachman's books and the first books written about him are the fruits of Rabbi Nathan's devotion. Much more than an editor and a compiler, he was also a creative writer in his own right and actually added to and developed Rabbi Nachman's teaching. Rabbi Nathan's book, Likutei Tefillot, Collection of Prayers, is in itself a remarkable poetic creation, a passionate devotional work produced in response to Rabbi Nachman's wishes that his teachings should be expressed as prayer. Rabbi Nathan's creative powers are particularly evident in his great book, Likutei Halakot, a series of mystical or Kabbalistic discourses on Halakha, the Jewish canon law, in which he not only draws on Rabbi Nachman, but expands on him in a brilliant original commentary. Yeah, I love the way he really expresses codifiers, and he talks about the center light of the menorah and the middle light, which they use as a helper. He describes the codifiers as being that line where Hashem has determined right and wrong to be on one side or the other, and to understand the codifier in that sense, it's not a question of anybody's subjective opinion, but what does Hashem, Almighty God, have to say on the matter and why? And so when they call it a codifier, it's the why this way is wrong and why this way is right, and boom, it's, for me, always what turns on the light bulb. Rabbi Nathan succeeded Rabbi Nachman as leader of the Breslov Hasidim, although such was his devotion to his teacher's memory that he steadfastly refused to become the Rebbe of the community, but rather retained the status of pupil of his great master. Hence, the unique characteristic of the Breslov Hasidim down to the present time. They are a Hasidic court with no living Rebbe, but regard themselves as the direct followers of the irreplaceable Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman began to relate the tales in 1806. Each one was told spontaneously, usually after a relevant talk or sermon. The greatest and the most significant were told during his last years, and the most important of all, the 7 beggars, just half a year before his death. Hasidic literature is rich in stories and anecdotes, but Nachman's tales have quite a different quality. The Hasidic story usually relates to specific individuals, usually leading personalities of the movement, their deeds, righteousness, sanctity, wonders that befell them, or in their words of wisdom. Rabbi Nachman's tales, on the other hand, have a distinctive form and thus became a vehicle for his teachings and ideas on various issues, in the form of myths or legends. In terms of structure, they are similar to folk or fairy tales, Jewish and non-Jewish. They do not fall into the category of Bell's Letters like the mythic stories of Hans Christian Andersen, Oscar Wilde, Franz Kafka, whose work has much in common with Nachman's, Hermann Hesse, and others. These literary fairy tales, like other literary works in general, are intended to express ideas, portray characters, and serve as a vehicle for poetic and symbolic language. Yeah, and the way it lights up the mind, just phenomenal. But Nachman's stories include highly compressed and clearly defined Torah teachings, just as do his other works expressed in literary and poetic form. Thus, the tales are simply a more literary, sophisticated means of presenting the teachings, and form, or even plot, is not used as an end in itself. Rabbi Nachman himself well understood the significance of the literary form he had chosen. He said, "From now on I will tell you tales," adding that he believed that thus he would be better able to explain his teachings in a more profound and penetrating way. And I found, he made some explanation about the order from the heavens when decrees come down from heaven. And he explained basically how the positive angels, if you will, debate the matter, and it is the destructive angels that put into effect the ruling. And just the concept, when we think of things in this world, if you've ever been in certain fates or what seemed fate, situations you could not stop, he explained that the way these destructive angels put into effect the rulings from heaven, and they can use anything on the earth to become an agent of heavenly decree. And if you've ever gone through a cycle in life where things seem to be, no matter what you do, you can't get out of a situation or a circumstance. But he also explains the way prayer works upward and enables somebody to change the heavenly decree. But you have to merit prayer, and the way intellect flows and turns on in the brain. I find he's got such explanations. The stories and tales he tells, if they're expanded upon, they just go so deep. So, yeah. Let's see. At the same time, he also gave explicit Torah teachings, Likutei Moharan, Patar Shimon, in which he outlined his approach. He was wont to say that no one is capable of absorbing explicit Torah teaching without some loss of meaning, and that therefore the inner content has to be given by means of tales and stories. Oh, and he explained the reason for tales and stories being that these destructive angels listen in, and so the rabbis learned to speak with, if you want to say parables or tales, so that it was confusing to the destructive angels, which if they were listening in on your conversation and thoughts per se by functioning based on stories, they didn't get it to respond. So just some profound ideas that just lit up in my mind lots of thinking. As he put it, when the blind man is healed, one must protect him from the sudden glare of the light. The inner face of truth must be disguised lest it be distorted or harmfully misunderstood. Wow. And the true scholar disguises the inner meaning of his teachings according to the level of his hearer. That's huge statements. Rabbi Nachman ends this discourse with the words, "But then there is one who fell so deeply asleep that he could not be roused except by the tales of ancient days, from which all 70 faces of the Torah received their being." Yeah, and he just basically describes such order in Hashem's manner of functioning in this world, which allows for Hashem's direct overruling based on personal repentance and prayer. But when systems start to begin, it functions like clockwork. It's just profound notions, I find. Rabbi Nachman's stories, which he himself called Tales of Ancient Days, are therefore a medium for conveying the hidden aspects of the Torah in all its multifaceted dress, albeit in such a veiled way that the content is not outwardly apparent. Therefore, anyone can accept and achieve some kind of enrichment and enlightenment from it. An ingenious approach, for sure. The tales are few in number. 13 of varying lengths make up the main body of the work. Yeah, so this book is only about double what the last one we read was. So hopefully we can knock it off in 6 or 8 sessions. Some shorter tales were also added as was at a later date. A long story doubtfully attributed to Rabbi Nachman, while others, a handful, may be found scattered throughout his various works. Although they are so few, the tales are not uniform in literary style or in content. For instance, the story The Clever Man and the Simple Man express a straightforward idea in a unique narrative style. The Losing of the King's Daughter appears to be an adaptation of a folktale, while The Merchant and the Pauper is pure allegory. Some of the stories, such as The Master of the Prayer and The Seven Beggars, are extremely complex. Tales within tales within tales. In some cases, the story itself is well known. Yeah, he says tales within tales within tales. Rabbi Nachman talks about seals within seals within seals and how to open the seals, and just such profound notions. And the only change in emphasis gives it its special quality. Elsewhere, the plot is totally original from start to finish and has no parallel outside of Rabbi Nachman's own creative world. Generally speaking, he then used literary form not as an end in itself, but as a means of expressing ideas. However, in everything relating to the details of the story itself, in its substantive adaptation, in the use of language, no less than the development of the story, he is meticulous. Although he may depart from the subject at hand to raise another idea or to sketch in a new image, these departures are worked out to their minutest detail and carefully woven into the central theme, which in all of Nachman's tales has but one objective: to pass on his ideas. The sources from which these details of plot and tale are drawn are many and varied. Kabbalah, folktales, Bible, and Halakha, history and contemporary events all served him as raw material. This multiplicity of form and content have an additional, more spiritual meaning. Nachman himself has said that they try to express the 70 faces of the Torah, and indeed, in many instances, one may discern more than one meaning and even several layers of meaning. Most of these are not contradictory, but show different facets and aspects of one fundamental idea. It therefore happens that various details within one story do not relate to the same level of meaning. Here, too, we can see the parallel between the tales and Rabbi Nachman's sermons. For in Likutei Moharan, too, the subject subdivides into several sub-issues, each one of which is dealt with separately. Eventually, all these elements combine in the general structure. Kabbalistic sources. The fundamental key to Rabbi Nachman's tales is to be found in the Kabbalah. Almost all the tales, in terms of form and content, symbolism and imagery, heroes and poetic touches, are all taken from Kabbalah, especially the Book of the Zohar and the teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Holy Ari, from 1534 to 1572. This use is sometimes veiled by the imaginative structure or by a seemingly realistic description in which Kabbalistic symbols are not particularly evident. Elsewhere, especially in the last tales, which are highly complex in both content and structure, their source is plainly evident. That is to say, Rabbi Nachman takes symbols that have a clear and unequivocal meaning in the Kabbalah and weaves them into a perfect homiletic story. Sounds very interesting. The main difference between Kabbalistic symbolic literature generally and the symbolic form of Nachman's stories lies in the life and human vitality that Nachman gives these conventional symbols. In Kabbalistic literature, the use of symbols is stylized, and the various images serve almost as mathematical formula. In the tales, they become creatures of flesh and blood with human qualities and failings. Not only do the king, the queen, and the king's daughter appear in the tales in their clear Kabbalistic meaning, but they are balanced by meticulous attention to even the minutest details of the story. Nachman himself rightly pointed out that in this sense, his stories are precise, not only in their broad allegorical structure, but also in their finest details. His literary work is not impressionistic, but precise, similar to Bruegel painting, where even the seemingly trivial or scarcely seen detail is portrayed as exactly as the central figures themselves. Folk sources. Most fairy tales are presented as folk tales, from the opening formula, once upon a time, down to the intentionally simplistic and stylistic details. Rabbi Nachman not only makes use of this literary genre per se, but also draws heavily on existing folk tales. He himself was aware of this use. His follower has said, before he told the first tale in this book, he said, "The fairy tales of the world hold many hidden and exalted things, but they have become distorted because they are deficient and people have become confused and no longer tell them properly, putting the beginning at the end and the other way around." Now the Baal Shem Tov could create divine unities by means of a story. When he saw that the heavenly channels had been disrupted, he would correct them by means of a tale. Quoted from Rabbi Nathan's foreword to the tales. As a dedicated Hasid, Rabbi Nachman believed that the whole world, in all its details, is paralleled by an upper world, and that therefore tales and songs that men recount and sing are directed towards higher things, although the tellers themselves do not realize this. In the very same way, the leaders of the Hasidic movement also work with folk songs, Jewish and non-Jewish, linking them to their own inner content. The use of folk tales is, according to Rabbi Nachman's theory, not only an exploitation of familiar material, but an action that is in itself a tikkun, or a repair of the world, raising up the divine sparks that are imprisoned in the banality of the world, and thereby bringing about their redemption by means of their purposeful intention and meaningful use. However, Rabbi Nathan presented only a few of his teachers' tikkunim and adaptations of folktales because he dealt mainly with the original stories. And even here, where the plots are novel and original, we find extracts from well-known fairy stories that Rabbi Nachman combined with his own tales. In a way, it is precisely in these ancient stories that his creative gift becomes evident. The same small details that he adds, omits, arranges, or alters reveal his special touch that can turn a common folktale into a Kabbalistic allegory. Wow, yeah, he turns on a lot of lights. Biblical and Talmudic sources. Rabbi Nachman had a deep and wide knowledge of the scriptures, as is outstandingly evident in all his writings. In all his work, and especially in the tales, he uses these sources in a special way. Blessed as he was not only with great poetic imagination and a powerful feeling for great symbology, but also with a great felicity of word imagery. Most people take the imagery and idiom of their own tongue for granted. Nachman, on the other hand, not only saw this imagery in its conventional meaning, but was able to give these figures of speech life in a clear visual and spatial terms. When he read the Bible, the whole galaxy of figures sprang into life and motion. Verses, paragraphs, and sometimes even whole chapters became tales in his eyes. In fact, we find this view of the Bible in much of Kabbalistic literature, while Nachman, in the tales as elsewhere, went beyond this to creative development of the original. An outstanding example may be found in The Master of Prayer. This almost concrete use of language is not unknown in literature generally, but is most evident among painters. Many of Chagall's works are simply pictures of figures of speech. Dreams. Another source for at least some of Nachman's tales seem to have been his dreams. And he gives such descriptions of the process and what goes on in a dream and what cannot go on in a dream and why it sticks with some and not with others. Just such profound notions of communique and threads of connectivity with the upper world. We cannot, of course, know which of the stories have their roots here, and it is sure that these too were adapted and processed by him. At the same time, it seems that several stories, in particular The Fly and the Spider, which does not appear in this collection, are simply adaptations of dreams. Other Rebbes also recounted complex and highly significant dreams, and some even made a practice of recording their night visions. See, for instance, Megillat Sitarim by Rabbi Yitzhak of Komarno, or Resisai Leila by Rabbi Zadok HaKohen. Rabbi Nachman himself did recount some of his dreams to his followers, and he had time, probably would have turned some of them into finished tales. Literary adaptations of some of these dreams are extant, at least 2 of them from the pen. Autobiographical and historical sources. A large part of Rabbi Nachman's output was autobiographical, for he contemplated his own life and he spoke a great deal about his experiences and thoughts. His tendency is consistent with his attitude toward confession, and his followers would indeed confess to him and eventually to each other. Nachman particularly stressed the human need to pour out one's heart before God. Oh, yeah, does he really stress this point? This is what can change heavenly decrees. Not only in formal prayers, but in personal conversation in which one tells him of one's spiritual and material problems. This teaching became one of the fundamentals of the Breslov way. It is not therefore surprising that a great deal of Nachman's teachings are a chain of personal tales and confessions. Thus, not only in his Torah teaching where he often spoke of himself and the problems in his soul, but in his stories, too, there is some kind of transfer of his private problems, even though the discussion is on a general objective level. Every literary or artistic work is actually partly autobiographical or contains a measure of confession. And often this is what gives it its power. Yeah, it's an outpouring of the soul. For this reason, there is an exaggerated attempt on the part of some researchers to stress the personal private side of Nachman's oeuvre. He himself was aware of this aspect of his work and would often take care to separate the personal from the general. The public teachings, no less than the tales, hint at his personality and deeds, although according to his view of things, the function of these experiences was to bring people to a better general understanding of what he wanted to convey. The private act, his own or anyone else's, for him hinted at the worlds above, and each man could find within his own life all the worlds. In my flesh I shall see God, from Job 19:26, is a principle of Kabbalah stressed by all the various schools of Hasidism. This is why we find in the tales many things that are directly connected with the events in Nachman's own life, and many of the characters, heroes, and subsidiary figures are reflections of the aspect of Nachman's personality. The lad in The Merchant and the Pauper, the eponymous hero in The Master of the Prayer, and so on. Many tales also express Rabbi Nachman's explicit response to events and occurrences. He himself said that some of his tales hold the key to things he had done in the past or had happened in his life. The selection of characters was therefore intentional and conscious, while in the adaptation of personages and events to the Torah teaching or a tale, they underwent a process of abstraction and generalization. Nachman saw himself as a symbol, as the hero of a story of cosmic significance. What an outlook. In some of the tales, we find not only an event in time that gives the story its dynamics, but also veiled hints at the real personalities, whether drawn from Rabbi Nachman's own personal circle or a historical figure from biblical times or later. Nachman also showed great interest, even though we today cannot always follow his allusions, in world news and events. The king's son and the son of the maid was told after a discourse on the Emperor Napoleon. He often mentions personalities of various sorts, such as Christopher Columbus, while elsewhere, as in The Master of the Prayer, there are references to specific events past and present. Form and content. When Rabbi Nachman told his stories orally, he expressed the desire that they should be published as a book, and even described the form of this book should take, sensing or knowing that the tales were not only an expression of his teachings, but also works of art. He said, My thought is to publish a book of tales, and it will be written with the upper part of the page in the Holy Tongue, Hebrew, with a Yiddish translation below. He added, And what can the world do with these tales? Well, after all, they are nice fables. This substantive relationship between form and content is one of the fundamental goals of these fables. From the outset, they were intended as pleasant tales, to be read for pleasure, even entertainment, while their inner content, with its many meanings, must function not only openly by means of a concerted effort, but also in such a way that the reader himself cannot always account for the fact that a given tale has affected him so greatly. Nachman's first story, The Losing of the King's Daughter, originally opened with these words, On the way I told a tale which caused all who heard it to begin to think on repentance. And this, in fact, was also the way of the Baal Shem Tov, to tell tales of multidimensional significance so that whoever heard them, even if ignorant of their symbolism, would still get something out of them. The ability of these tales to awaken from the sleep of 70 faces lies in this duality of form and content. The story told in this way is so weighted with significance that it forces the hearer to think on it again and again and to search for its general and personal meaning, to arouse man to greater things. Wow, that's just profound. The language and translations. The tales were originally told in Yiddish, but Rabbi Nachman wrote them down in Hebrew, and they were originally published in that language. But in subsequent editions, the author's wishes were carried out, and bilingual versions were published. Hebrew on the upper part of the page, Yiddish below. In the Hebrew version, Rabbi Nathan tried to preserve and duplicate the exact speech of the author in all its precise nuances. The text is therefore somewhat choppy and not always as clear as it could be. Rabbi Nathan actually apologized for the ungrammatical style, or coarse language he dubbed it, used in order to remain as faithful as possible to the original. The tales were translated into many languages, and the Hebrew versions underwent many adaptations. Successive editors and translators tried to improve or even adorn the language and style to make the storyline read more smoothly, thus causing the very thing Rabbi Nathan had striven hard to avoid, embellishments of form and polishing of plot. Even the slightest changes or omissions brought about subtle and not so subtle changes in meaning. It must be remembered that these stories were the product of a brilliant literary and intellectual creativity, and that each tale was carefully worked out with the interweaving of the small details into the overall framework, leading to a specific and definite meaning. For this reason, translations and adaptations that alter the form, even in the slightest degree, often disrupt the meaning of the content. An outstanding example is the translation by Martin Buber that is frequently an overly free adaptation of the original, in which the omissions and changes cause significant and sometimes deliberate distortions. This present translation is based on Rabbi Aiden Steinsaltz's Hebrew edition of the Tales from 1981, a text that diverged slightly from Rabbi Nathan's Hebrew version, relying to a large extent on the original source materials and in many instances on comparisons with the earlier Yiddish text. Although not the original that so many researchers believe it to be, this is by no means a secondary translation, as it is based upon a faithful record of the tales handed down by Rabbi Nachman's closest followers, who must have had vivid memories of hearing his Rebbe at first hand. Changes have inevitably resulted from the transfer from one language to another, and it is, of course, not always possible to find the exact word or phrase in all its most precise nuances, especially when translating from Hebrew and Yiddish, languages rich in associative idioms. There is no doubt that the English reader loses some of the vivid word images and combinations of the original. This loss is heightened when one remembers that almost 250 years separate us from Rabbi Nachman, with all the subsequent changes in language use, attitude, and life experience. The slight roughness and simplicity of form and language, and the details of content have been preserved as far as possible and serve not only to introduce the English reader to the contents and meaning of the tales, but also to convey something of their tone and feeling. Commentary. All Rabbi Nachman's tales, even the simplest of them, are highly significant, and most of them are complex allegories. As already noted, the tales were intended at the outset to have several dimensions. However, the commentary is not meant to be an exhaustive exploration of the whole treasury of meaning. Precise analysis and exhaustive commentary, even if these are possible, for we often lack the necessary tools for this task, would be a highly technical undertaking requiring great resources of time, effort, and manpower. For this reason, each tale in the collection has a commentary dealing with the tale's fundamental issues, in accordance with comparison with Kabbalistic and Hasidic texts and Rabbi Nachman's own works. Other strata of meaning, whether in relation to the whole tale or part of it, are sometimes hinted at in the body of the commentary. But the reader should bear in mind that within the framework of this book, it is not desirable to penetrate the depths of all these things and to analyze all the details, so that many issues are merely alluded to or mentioned in passing. Often, one may see in the different parts of a single story two different subject themes, each one belonging to a different meaning level or two different viewpoints of the story. The explanations are by way of being notes on a general framework of ideas intended to direct the reader in his search for the gate of the 70 faces of Torah. Although the tales are outstanding for their complex and complicated symbolism, some of these symbols are standard and regular because Rabbi Nachman's symbolic system is not an expression of his personal private world, but belongs to the whole body of Jewish and Kabbalistic thought. That's a big statement. Although Rabbi Nachman often gives a distinctive explanation and adds his own special contribution, this is an inseparable part of a long tradition of Jewish thinking in general and of Hasidic thinking in particular. Thus, the selection of the fundamental symbols was not arbitrary or by chance, but inevitably derived from Rabbi Nachman's Hasidic sources and ways of thinking, on which he built. Moreover, Rabbi Nachman's tales deal not with the whole range of Jewish thought, but with the specific aspects of it. And obviously, there is an inner and external connection between the stories. Although the plot varies greatly from tale to tale, most of the stories have one general theme, the problem of the tikkun or repair of the world, and its way to redemption. Our world is the world of exile, an imperfect world, and almost impenetrable by divine light. The goal of the Jewish people, especially its leaders and righteous souls, and above all, the Messiah, is to redeem the world and to perfect it. Therefore, most of Rabbi Nachman's stories deal with various aspects of these fundamental issues. In some stories, the subject is universal. In others, it is connected to the individual struggle of man's soul. In others, the specific issue of the Messiah is raised, but all the stories complement each other and, together, make up a single cycle, whose central theme is the problem of the crisis of the world and its redemption. The king. In most of Rabbi Nachman's stories, the king or emperor symbolizes God, as is usually plain to see in the context. Whenever a story speaks of one king a supreme king who is ruler over all. The meaning is the King of Kings. In Jewish tradition, this is one of the most ancient symbols of all, occurring in the Torah itself, in the teaching of the prophets and in the Psalms, in the Talmud and in homiletic teachings. In the Midrash, it is also a standard symbol. A text beginning Parable of the King almost always refers to God, and this is its inevitable reflection in Kabbalah and also in Hasidism. The most outstanding aspect of Rabbi Nachman's tales is the symbolic imagery of the king, and it is paradoxical fact that he is almost always portrayed outside the actual framework of the plot itself. The king, with whom so many of the tales begin, is not the hero of the story, and may even be the king who died or the king who was. This fact need not surprise us. According to the reality characteristic of the subject of Rabbi Nachman deals with, God is not actively revealed in the world. The Creator, who is the prime cause of all life, is not revealed within the ugly world of exile and fall. And the very fact that the world is in a state of exile derives from God's not being revealed in it. On the contrary, the world in which the king is revealed as king of the universe, and which he actively rules, is the world redeemed, the perfected world. The creation of the world and the giving of free will to man are, in a certain sense, the beginning of Hester Panim, or divine withdrawal, literally concealing the face, until it seems that God hath forsaken the earth, from Ezekiel 88, verse 12. Therefore, God acts from a position of withdrawal, although this action is not manifest or seen, and herein lies the major thrust of the tales. The choice of returning to a state of revelation, redemption, is given to mankind generally, and the Jewish people in particular. For this reason, it is not the king who is the active factor in the tales, but rather the people who go in search of him. Make sense? Thus, in most of the stories, the king creates the basic situation, and from that point on, the hero is charged with bringing about the tikkun, or repair of the world. According to Kabbalah, God himself, the infinite one, blessed be he, acts in the world by means of the 10 sefirot, attributes or emanations of the divine, that characterizes his revelation as creator and prime mover. The essence that lies beyond these revelations from the supreme crown onward is the void, and he himself is hidden. Verily thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel, from Isaiah 45:15. At the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, from Psalm 18:12. As the Baal Shem Tov explained many times, the revelation that God is to be found within that concealment is itself the solution, the redemption expressed as they shall see eye to eye, from Isaiah 52:8. The King's Daughter. The King's Daughter is a frequent image in the tales. She, too, is usually used in a single symbolic sense, that of the Shekinah. Understanding of which is one of the fundamental issues in Kabbalistic literature. It may be said that the formula, the Holy One, blessed be he, and his Shekinah, is the principal foundation of the relationship between God and the world. In the most basic way, the Shekinah is the immanence of the divine power in this world, and that which vivifies it. The Shekinah is the divine emanation that pours forth on the world, the inner breath of life of the universe. And since the Shekinah is the essence of the life of the world, it is clear that she has names, appellations, and revelations without number. Because, in a certain sense, the existence of the world is only one specific aspect of the Shekinah. In the Kabbalah, the Shekinah is the emanation usually called sovereignty, because she is the sovereign power of God in the world, and therefore, as well as being a female figure, is the recipient of divine abundance. She is called the king's daughter. Sovereignty, or the Shekinah, has another side. It is also the community of Israel in its spiritual sense, the source of all the souls of Israel, the source in which all the souls exist as a single unit. In another sense, it is the source of power, the communal soul of all Israel. The use of these interpretations of the Shekinah are found throughout the scriptures, and the images of Israel as the woman, bride, daughter, or beloved are found in the Torah, in the prophets, and in Jewish literature generally throughout the generations. The fall of the world and its receding from the awareness of its link to the divine and to the exile and fall of Israel are the exile of the Shekinah, and the redemption is the rising of the Shekinah from the dust. As stated, all of Jewish literature abounds in symbols, parables, and images of the Shekinah, all of which blend to produce poetic forms that can be interpreted in many ways. Two images are particularly frequent: the Shekinah as the bride of God, or according to the concept of the Song of Songs, the beloved of God, or the bride of the king's daughter, with Israel as the bridegroom, a figure frequently found in homiletic Midrash Agadah. The two images combined in wonderfully subtle fashion in the song sung to welcome the Sabbath, Aleka Dodi, beloved, come to meet the bride, in which inner content is generated by the transition from one meaning to another. In the tales, wherever the king's daughter is mentioned, the reference is to the Shekinah as the soul of the world, the soul of Israel, and the link between Israel and the Messiah. In any case, it should be remembered that the number of images, symbols, and parables bound up together is very large, and although Rabbi Nachman makes overt use of some of them, he more often merely hints at their deeper significance, which perhaps can be understood only by referring to their inner meanings of the tales. The shattering of vessels. The world in general, and the Jewish world in particular, are not perfected at this time, but await redemption. The removal of the barriers and the veil that separate divine existence in the world. The same crisis points in which we find this withdrawal are one of the central issues of Kabbalah. These crisis points are historically sequential and all follow some basic pattern: the fall from a higher to a lower state, or from a stage of relative perfection to a fall that is never final, whose outcome is always a new ascent. Indeed, sometimes the fall is necessary in order to rise again. Each crisis, because of this inner similarity, may be represented by the same images, which, although certainly not identical, are all connected. We may identify four major crises in cosmic history. The first precedes creation and is actually the means of creation of our world, with the divine withdrawal, with the fact of its being world in all its entirety. This crisis is called the shattering of the vessels, a concept dominant in Lurianic Kabbalah. Put simply, the higher forces fell and shattered before the creation of the world. Some are the divine sparks of which our world is partly formed, while others fell so far that they became trapped in the world's matter and thus supported its physical being, including the evil in it. Yeah, this is where you get Christian distortion of a war in heaven. Yeah, miss the whole point of what this intends to tell the mind. The perfect redemption of these sparks is the purpose of man's existence and of Israel's existence in particular. The second crisis is the sin of the tree of knowledge, the fall of Adam, the first man, from the perfection of Eden to the confusion and disruption of our world in which the distinction between good and evil has become blurred. This is the fall common to all mankind. The next comes the sin of the golden calf. After the spiritual exaltation of the giving of the Torah, in itself a return to Eden, the Jewish nation goes astray and worships the idol of the golden calf, thus forfeiting its uniqueness as a vessel for the perfect transmission of the laws of the world, and as a result must find its way to redemption for itself and for others. The fourth crisis is the destruction of the temple, which was also by way of being an element of Eden, a transition to the created world. Since the destruction, the Shekinah itself is in exile and no longer revealed at any particular point in this world. This is a very key point to consider the temple as the dwelling place for the Shekinah. The exile of the Shekinah, like the shattering of the vessels, opens the way to the forces of evil that derive their strength from her strength, until it is they who visibly become the ruling force in our world. While sanctity and holiness, the holiness and sanctity of Israel, are in exile, withdrawn into obscurity. The Shekinah in exile is not only withdrawn in that she is unrevealed and unknown, and that her feet go down to death, Proverbs 5:5, but she actually becomes the force that feeds the evil in the world. Man's sins, Israel's sin, increase this withdrawal in the sense that I have sinned and he is bound in chains. In Rabbi Nachman's tales, the fall is portrayed by several images, of which the most outstanding is the lost king's daughter hunted and hounded, the Shekinah in exile. And since the various stages of the fall are internally connected, it is not surprising that several events occurring at different times are portrayed in one allegorical description, which is compacted with other elements and aspects that all complement and fulfill each other. Heroes. As in most stories, Rabbi Nachman's heroes are solitary men, and since they are at the same time both fictional and symbolic figures, and since their symbolism is also wide-ranging, they are not simple individuals either. Like the figures of the Bible and the Kabbalah, they are multifaceted, not just private personages, but also archetypes. The sages held that the acts of the fathers are an addition to the sons, a nation that Nachmanides developed into a unique system of commentary on biblical personalities. And it is a fact that in Jewish literature, even historical figures are part of a universal symbolic world. We find in man that which we find in the world. In Kabbalistic literature in particular, biblical figures are symbolically associated with the specific emanations or attributes of God called the Sephirot, particularly the seven shepherds, leaders of Israel. Thus, in order of appearance, Abraham is grace, Yitzhak, might, Jacob, splendor, Joseph, root or foundation, Moses, eternity, and also knowledge, Aaron, majesty, David, and also Rachel, sovereignty. In Rabbi Nachman's tales, too, the character often represents a specific attribute of the divine. The relationship between man and the world, the fact that man is a little world in himself, is one of the most fundamental concepts of Kabbalah. In Hasidic literature, this idea was strongly emphasized and appears in many forms, from a view of the Torah as man's world. Rabbi Yosef of Polonoi, a follower of the Baal Shem Tov, to a view of the precise relations between the soul and the Sephirot that is highly developed in the literature of the Chabad movement. The same idea occurs frequently in Rabbi Nachman's works, and several of his stories can be understood both in universal human terms and also as a theory of events occurring within the soul. These commentaries do not contradict each other, but are complementary. The Shekinah is also the communal soul of the nation of Israel, and, in a sense, is also the highest soul of every Jew. The loss, seeking out an eventual redemption of the Shekinah, is the private experience of sin and separation from God, which is paralleled by the universal experience of exile and redemption. Thus, Rabbi Nachman's heroes are sometimes universal and struggle for the being of the whole world, and sometimes they are righteous tzaddikim, working for redemption in the Jewish context. Elsewhere, they are individual powers working within the soul, and sometimes they are all of these things together. Wow, to understand such definitions. Okay, you know what? I think we got about 25 minutes. Shall I get into one? Or shall we come back to this tomorrow? I think we should, let's get into it so we know we got a taste of what we got coming. The losing of the king's daughter. Once there was a king who had 6 sons and 1 daughter. The daughter was very precious to him. He was very fond of her and used to play with her. One day, when they were together, he was annoyed at her, and the words flew from his lips, "May the evil one take you." That night she went to her room, and in the morning no one knew where she was. Her father, the king, was very distressed, and he sought her everywhere. On seeing that the king was in great sorrow, the king's chamberlain asked to be given a servant, a horse, and money for expenses, and he went to look for her, and he searched for a very long time until he found her. He journeyed through the deserts, fields, and forests. Once he was traveling in the desert, he saw a side path. He decided that since he had been in the desert for such a long time and had not found her, he should try that path, and perhaps he would reach a town or village. He went on for a long time, and in the end saw a castle and many soldiers standing guard all around it. The castle was beautiful and finely laid out, with well-trained guards. He was afraid that the guards would not let him in, but he decided, "I shall take the risk." So he left the horse and he went up to the castle. He was allowed to go in. No one hindered him, and he went from room to room. He came to a great hall and saw a king wearing his crown and many soldiers standing about. Many musicians were playing their instruments before the king, and it was all very beautiful and fine. And neither the king nor anyone else asked him anything. He saw good food there, and he went and ate. Then he went to lay down in a corner to watch what was happening. He saw the king order that the queen be brought, and the servants went to bring her. Then there was a great commotion and much joy, and the musicians played and sang when she was brought. A throne was brought for her, and she was seated next to the king. The chamberlain saw her and recognized her. It was the lost daughter of his king. The queen looked around and saw someone lying in the corner, and she recognized him. She got up and went over to him. Then she touched him and asked, "Do you recognize me?" He answered, "Yes, I recognize you. You are the king's daughter who was lost." He asked her, "How do you come to be here?" She answered, "Because of the words that flew from my father's lips, that the evil one take me. This is the evil one's place." He told her that her father was grief-stricken and had been looking for her for many years. Then he asked her, "How can I get you out of here?" She answered, "You cannot unless you choose a place and remain there for a year, and for the entire year you yearn to get me out of here. Whenever you have a free moment, you must do nothing but yearn for me and hope to get me out of here. And on the last day of the year, you must fast and not sleep for 24 hours. So he went away and did all that she said. At the end of the year, on the last day, he fasted and did not sleep all night. Then he got up and went to the king's daughter to take her away. On the way, he saw a tree on which fine apples were growing, and he was filled with longing, and he ate one of them. As soon as he ate the apple, he fell down, and a deep sleep overcame him. He slept for a very long time. His servant shook him, but could not rouse him. Then, when he awoke, he asked the servant, "Where am I in the world?" The servant told him the whole story. "You have been sleeping for many years. I kept myself alive by eating the fruit." He was grief-stricken and went back to the king's daughter. She was in great sorrow and said, "Because of one day, because you could not restrain yourself for one day and you ate the apple, you have lost everything. Had you come on that day, you would have taken me out of here. True, it is difficult not to eat, especially on the last day when the evil impulse is so strong. Go, therefore, and choose yourself another place and remain there for a year. On the last day you may eat, but you must not slumber. You must drink no wine, lest you fall asleep. The main thing is sleep. He went away and did what she said. On the last day he returned to her. On the way he saw a flowing spring. It was red, and its smell was the smell of wine. He said to his servant, "Look, there is a spring, and water should be flowing from it, but it is red, and its smell is the smell of wine." And he went and he tasted a little of the spring, and immediately he fell down and slept for 70 years. While he was sleeping, many soldiers marched past, and their baggage trains went after them. The servant hid himself from the soldiers. Then a carriage went past, and the king's daughter was in it. She stepped down and sat next to the chamberlain. She recognized him and tried to rouse him, but he did not wake up. She then began to complain that after all the troubles and tribulations, after all the years that he had spent trying to get her away, because of one day on which you might have succeeded, you have lost everything. And she wept a great deal and said, "It is a great pity for you and for me. I have been here for such a long time, and I cannot get away." Then she took a kerchief from her head, and she wrote on it with her tears, and left it by his side, and she rose and seated herself in the carriage and drove away. When he woke up, he asked the servant, "Where am I in the world?" The servant told him the whole story, how many soldiers had marched past, and then the carriage had gone by, and the king's daughter had stepped down and wept over him, and that she had said that it was a great pity for both of them. He looked about him and saw the kerchief lying nearby. He asked, "Where is this from?" The servant answered, "She left it here and wrote on it with her tears." So he took the kerchief and raised it to the sun and began to see letters, and then he heard what was written about her complaints and her weeping, and that she was no longer in the same castle. He should search for a golden mountain on which stood a castle of pearl, and there you will find me. He left the servant and went off by himself to search for her. He searched for several years. Then he thought, in places where men dwell one cannot find a golden mountain on which stands a castle of pearl, for he knew geography. So I shall go into the desert and seek her there. He went to the desert for many years. Then he saw a huge man, a giant of a size that was not human, who was carrying a huge tree of a size that one does not see where men live. And the giant asked him, "Who are you?" He answered, "I am a human being." The giant was astonished and said, "I have been here in the desert for such a long time, and I have never yet seen a human being here." The chamberlain told him the story of what had happened, and how he was searching for a golden mountain on which stood a castle of pearl. The giant answered, "There can be no such thing. It cannot be. People have been telling you stupid tales." But the chamberlain insisted, "It must exist somewhere." Then the giant said, "In my opinion, it's all nonsense, but since you insist, I shall help you. I am in charge of all the beasts. For your sake, I shall summon them all here. They run all over the world, and perhaps one of them knows about your mountain and castle." So he summoned all the beasts, large and small, and questioned them. They all answered that they had not seen the mountain. He said, "You see, you have been told stupid tales. If you listen to me, you will turn back, because what you are seeking does not exist." But the chamberlain insisted, "I know that it must exist." Then the giant said, "I have a brother in the desert. He is in charge of all the birds. Perhaps they know because they fly high in the air. Maybe they have seen the mountain and the castle. Go to him and tell him that I sent you." And the chamberlain went to search for him. After many years he met a huge man, a giant who was also carrying a huge tree, and who also questioned him, as the first one had. And the chamberlain told him the whole story, and the giant's brother had sent him. Isn't this like the story of life? Things just pile up and pile up and pile up. And this giant, too, said that no such thing existed, but the chamberlain insisted that it must exist somewhere. Then the giant said, "I am in charge of all the birds, large and small. I shall summon them. Perhaps they will know." So he summoned all the birds, large and small, and questioned them. They all answered that they did not know of the mountain in the castle. He said, "You see, no such thing exists. If you listen to me, you will turn back because you are seeking what you are seeking does not exist." But the chamberlain persisted and said, "It certainly does exist, somewhere in the world." The giant said, "Farther on in this same desert is my brother. He is in charge of the winds. Since they blow over the whole world, perhaps they will know." And the chamberlain went on and searched for many years. And then he found another giant who was also carrying a huge tree. The chamberlain told him also the story of what had happened, and this giant also tried to discourage him, telling him that no such thing existed. But the chamberlain persisted. So the giant said, "For your sake I shall summon all the winds and question them." So he summoned all the winds and asked them, and not one of them knew about the mountain in the castle. The giant said to the chamberlain, "You see, you have been told stupid tales." Then the chamberlain began to weep and said, "I know that it does exist somewhere in the world." Meanwhile, the giant saw that another wind had come. He was angry with it and said, "Why are you late? Did I not summon all the winds? Why didn't you come with him?" The wind answered, "I was delayed because I had to carry the daughter of a king to a golden mountain on which stands a castle of pearl." The chamberlain was filled with joy. The giant asked the wind, "What precious things are in that place?" The wind answered, "Everything there is precious." Then the giant said to the chamberlain, "You have been searching for so long, and you have undergone many tribulations. Perhaps lack of money is troubling you. I shall give you a vessel. When you put your hand into it, you will take out money." And he ordered the wind to take him to the mountain of gold. So the storm wind came and carried him there and set him down by the gate of a city. The soldiers stood there and did not let him enter. So he put his hand in the vessel and took out money and bribed them. And he entered the city. It was a beautiful city, and he went to a rich man and arranged a board with him, for he would have to spend time there. He would need to use wisdom and knowledge to get the king's daughter out. And how he got her out of there he did not relate. But in the end, he succeeded. Well, what a story. And you know what? I think we'll leave the commentary of this until tomorrow. Yeah, so we can deal with it fresh. Okay, sound good? I hope you're enjoying this. It sounds like a profound book, and I look forward to seeing how the commentaries unfurl all this. And I'm sure it will be worthwhile and filled with revelation. But I love the way he tells the story. Yeah, so I look forward to that. So let's leave that till tomorrow, and we'll be back with more Rocky Mountain readings and the tales of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. So till tomorrow, have a wonderful, wonderful day, everybody. Bye for now.